So thanks for us making time today, and welcome everybody joining us on Instagram. And I think you and I are doing more social media in the last week than we have in the last 6 months.
Well, I feel like we have a platform to be able to tell people what's really going on. I think the mainstream media is a little bit behind, and you never know what's the truth. And I think it's great that you're able to bring scientists together to talk about what's going on and what they think.
Thank you, pal. I just want to say, first of all, your last newsletter, your last lifespan newsletter on coronavirus is just so rich and so excellent. And anybody watching who hasn't signed up for David's lifespan newsletter, in particular, the content and the data you put out to try and disseminate what's truly going on is amazing. Where'd they go to sign up for that, by the way, David?
That's at lifespanbook.com.
Yeah. So just if you're looking for latest information by a very rational, brilliant mind, please see it there. David, do you mind if I open up with a measure of hope and positive focus for our conversation here? Because there's something, I think, extraordinary. There's a lot of reason for concern, and there's a lot of safety issues and precautions that need to be taken. But there are two pandemics going on here. There's a viral pandemic with coronavirus and COVID-19. There's also a pandemic of fear that in some ways is causing more damage to society than the virus is. And that is, I think, a mutual concern that we and a lot of people in our ecosystem have. And one of the things that we are linear thinkers, and in a very exponential world, and we don't know how to think exponentially. And this has two impacts. One is really, as we're seeing exponential growth of infection rates and such, we literally project, and we're surprised all of a sudden when the numbers explode onto the scene. I'll remind people, double something 10 times, it's 1,000 times worse. Double it 20 times, it's 1,000,000 times. Double it 30 times, it's 1,000,000,000 times. And we've seen that in Moore's law and computational power. But there's another exponential going on that is a counterforce, a positive counterforce here that I'd love to get your thoughts on as we open up here, which is that humanity has never had a single common enemy. Never. I don't think it's ever had that. We came close with the environment and people's concerns about environmental crisis, but then there are those leaders and those nations that might benefit from warming temperatures, and so it's a divided global populace. But this little viral bugger, to give it a name, doesn't discriminate across, and it's impacting every nation. And so for the first time ever, we're seeing, my estimate is on the order of a couple of 100 million scientists, engineers, nurses, physicians, all taking aim. And that we've never seen that before. We have never seen that level of cohesive, coherent collaboration to stop a problem. And I'm super excited about the number of parallel experiments going on around the world and the reporting among scientists. I'd love your thought on that to kick us off.
Well, yeah, I'm similarly thrilled that humanity has come together for the first time. I'm like you. I cannot think of any time in the last 1,000,000 years when our species has come together against a common enemy. It's reassuring, and I know when humans come together to fight against something, the enemy has no way out. We've only been working on this really for the last couple of months, and really in earnest the last few weeks. So the virus, I think, doesn't stand a chance against us, but we do need time to ramp up, and it is a formidable enemy. Where I come from, or where I stand, there's a swirl of activity. I closed my lab down for the most part. We keep the mice and the cells growing, but I thought, wow, I'm going to have a lot of time. I'm not traveling. Usually I'm on the road like you are. And it's actually busier than ever. And the reason is that we scientists, we're in the epicenter of trying to solve this problem. And I've got probably 100 people every day that are sending me information. And what's also really heartwarming is that scientists are usually quite competitive. They want the glory, or they don't want to talk to other labs. That's all gone. You know, we are all united, and across the globe, I'm talking to scientists in China and across the US, and you know, and we're also cutting across platforms. We've got scientists talking to epidemiologists, to doctors, and that's why I have a lot of optimism, like you do.
Yeah. You know, I always used to think that it would take an asteroid impact or an impending asteroid or an impending alien invasion to sort of unify the human race. And this is an alien invasion of some type, but it really is. And we can talk about later on what are the long lasting implications of this. There's another meta concept I want to bring onto the table, which is that it could be a lot worse than it is on this virus. And in that regard, and I'd like to qualify what I mean by that, but in that regard, I almost think of this as a practice pandemic. You know, you mentioned in Life Force, which for everybody who's not read it, I just put out a book called The Future is Faster Than You Think, and I go out on stage and I say, read Life Force before you read my book. It's that important book.
Just a small correction. It's called Lifespan.
I'm sorry. Lifespan. I know Lifespan. It's called Lifespan. I say read Lifespan before you read Future is Faster. It's an incredible book, David. So thank you for putting that out. And in Lifespan, you speak about one of your greatest concerns are pandemics. It has been for me one of my greatest concerns as well. In fact, this year the XPRIZE's theme is addressing humanity's existential threats: pandemics, asteroid impacts, nuclear hate and terrorism, environmental collapse, and so forth. Could you imagine, when I say this is a good practice pandemic, does that make you cringe, or do you agree with me?
I agree with you. I think it could be a lot worse. It could be a virus that has the worst of everything, which is takes 4 or 5 days for symptoms, and then it's lethal in 30% of people. That's what would be like an asteroid. This one is going to be horrible in terms of worse than any virus that we've seen in a while. Certainly worse than flu by a fair bit. But like you say, we will be ready for the next one. You make no mistake. We'll be ready with viruses, with vaccines at the ready. I don't think we'll ever be left without equipment. What I'm hoping is, so we have the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, and a Space Force. What we need after this is a bioforce that is ready with warehouses of gear and scientists at the ready to come together. And we weren't ready for this one, and but that won't happen again, I think.
Yeah, I agree 100% with you. I was just seeing some of the comments coming through, and yeah, Bill Gates gave an amazing TED Talk back in 2015 that describes exactly what's going on here. And we have to realize that the nature is constantly generating virus challenges for the human race, and it's just a matter of the combinations. And so I agree, and that bioforce or pandemic force, whatever, I forgot what you called it in the moment. What'd you call it?
I just called it a bioforce.
Yeah, bioforce. I agree with you, and part of that is going to be 3D printing files that we can 3D print our masks, 3D print our ventilators, 3D print whatever we need in the moment, but also large reserves available that nations can share. And then the other thing that's amazing, and we've talked about, David, and my focus is more sort of the convergence of exponentials, is the ability to have sensors out there in the world that catch this super early, sequence it minutes later, and then are generating, antivirus type tools that are being transmitted at the speed of light to factories and facilities around the world, so that we just nail it in a moment.
Yeah, well, so most people know me as an aging researcher, and sometimes people would say, well, why is this guy talking about a pandemic? Well, what most people don't know, because it's not something I talk about every day, is that out of my lab spun a company that detects viruses and all pathogens in a sample of human DNA, or RNA for that matter, which is what the virus contains. And so this company, as well as others like it, are at the cutting edge of being able to detect viruses continuously around the planet, sequence their DNA or RNA, and track where it's going and how it's mutating. One of the things that is incredible about this particular virus is that it's mutating faster than any pathogen that I've seen. It's expected for an RNA-based life form or a sublife form, or whatever you call it, a bugger of a thing. If you compare it to the rate of mutation for even flu, it's an order of magnitude faster in its rate of evolution. And it's actually quite interesting to go to a website called nextstrain.org and have a look at how it's changing. We've got some strains, one from Belgium that now has 4 mutations that change the proteins. Now, the question is it going to get worse or better? It looks like that Belgian strain, at least according to the timeline, is not spreading. So maybe the virus is wiping itself out. That can happen. But I'm also paying very close attention to what these amino acid changes are in these proteins of the virus to try and predict whether it's going to make the virus worse rather than less effective.
I'm scanning the questions as they're coming in. Tali on my team is keeping a running list here. I'm going to hit a couple of these as they come in. One that I want to squelch from the top, is this a bioweapon out of China or someplace?
Yeah, I think it's important to dispel that. It's nearly impossible for that to be true. And one of the things that I can do as a geneticist is look at the DNA, well, the RNA sequence of this virus. It's clearly natural. It's slowly evolved out of bats, and there's no fingerprints on it that look like human. And we don't need to invoke humans for this. This is happening all the time in nature. And so this, to me, sounds like, an interesting idea, but it doesn't bear out when you look at the actual science of it.
Yeah. So I think about, and the work that I've got 2 of my companies involved in therapeutics and vaccines right now, and everybody, and that's what gives me such incredible hope, is that everybody's like stopping what they're doing and pivoting here, right? And we're going to have a tsunami of solutions coming, like boom, 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 boom. It's going to crush. I like to say we're going to science the shit out of this virus.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love following you on all of the social media. I love that. And so just same with my companies, in particular, that one I mentioned, it stopped what it was doing. It was working mainly on viruses for immune compromised people. And they stopped that 100%. And now they're 100% focused on figuring out how to detect the virus and track it around the world. And I think when we all do that, and you and I are just 2 people, it's happening all around the world. In terms of drug development, there's now, a few days ago, I counted at least 40 clinical trials with various drugs and vaccines.
Yeah, no, it's people should take hope in this, because our immediate reaction is this pandemic is happening, it's spreading, people are dying, and it's going to continue and nothing's going to change. But that's not true. At the same time that it's continuing, a lot of things are changing. And while China had a 2-month period of viral peak and fall off, we're now benefiting from all of the science done in the interim 2 months. Yeah. Let's talk about detection, vaccination, and therapeutics. A lot of questions coming in along those lines. So on the detection side, we detect the virus in 2 ways. There's a PCR test, which is looking for the active virus in your sinuses and looking for the RNA and saying, is there this sequence in your nasal swab? And then there is a blood antibody test to say, is your immune system seeing this? And they both have different places in society. I've got some things going on there. What are you seeing? What are you hearing on the testing front?
Well, we were pretty much caught flat-footed, unfortunately, but it's changing rapidly. There is a 3rd test, which is DNA sequencing, which gives you the strain level identification, but that's a little more expensive and slower. The 2 tests that you mentioned, the frontline test when you go to the doctor is a PCR test, polymerase chain reaction, to amplify. You turn the RNA into DNA, then you amplify that up, and you get a certain size band if it's there. It's pretty accurate, 99.99% accurate. So that's the best one. The other one, which you said is an antibody test, that one's similar to a pregnancy test. You put a drop of blood in a little thing. Got a dog at the door here. And you get a band of a line that if it's positive. The problem with that, even though it's much quicker, instead of a few hours, like the PCR test, it can be 15 minutes. Problem there is, and I was researching this, the sensitivity is really only about 90%. So if you get a positive, it's good. If it's a negative, it's not definitive.
It is, and so I'll give everybody an example of what's going on. One of the companies that I'm on the board of, United Biomedical, is doing a large-scale test. The company, the co-CEOs are based in Telluride, and so they've got a San Miguel County, which is about 8,000 people, and they're going door to door and doing a blood test for antibodies. But the protocol is that they test again 10 days later. And so the test is over 2 tests over 10 days to either identify that you've been exposed and you have antibodies, or you haven't been exposed and then you haven't been exposed still, in which case you're still in isolation here. But it's, super cheap and the time to it is quickly. But the biggest concern in part of this is we don't actually know how many people are infected. We don't know what the denominator of this situation is. And so everybody's fearful.
Well, so this was I mentioned I was disappointed with the US. Now, the first test kits didn't work, right? It's because I'm told, but we should verify that the primers were designed poorly. That's a pretty bad mistake to make. Fortunately, there are a lot of companies that have jumped on this. I've been contacted by, well, at least 25 CEOs of companies and large hospitals that are, first of all, they were running out of test kits a few days ago, which was alarming. But the response has been great since then. I put out a call for anyone to contact me, and you can still do that. Reach out to me, and I can connect you with people who have test kits. There are PCR kits being made by the millions, actually. One company in China has come to our rescue in particular, and they're shipping large amounts to the US. We'll catch up. But right now, there is still a shortage of these kits, and people who have the true symptoms are being tested, but those people who just have a dry cough and suspect it, I think, are the ones not being tested right now.
Which causes fear. And by the way, just a shout out to China for the support that they have been providing. It's been, it's been super positive, and this just nation-to-nation collaboration. Let me hit a few of the questions that are coming in, pal. So another conspiracy theory to dispel that 5G has caused COVID-19. I smile at that, but any comments you want to make there?
Well, unless the pangolin or the bats are using cell phones, I think it's unlikely.
Yeah. Okay. So how does a disease like this jump from bats to humans?
Well, we don't know. The most likely is either direct or through another species, but they seem to emerge at these so-called wet markets in Asia, where people are cutting up these animals and being exposed to their blood or being bitten by them. Probably not eating a cooked soup. This virus is pretty sensitive to temperature, 55 degrees Celsius, whatever that is, Peter. I'm not good with Fahrenheit. But yeah, heat it up in a cup of soup, it's not going to survive. So probably it was someone had a cut on their hand, they got blood in there, or they cut their finger while they were cutting up the animal. We're not sure if it's a bat or through a pangolin, but that's probably the most likely. But what's interesting about this topic is that coronaviruses have been with us for a long time, probably all of our history. And through the 20th century, we know that they've been causing the common cold, about a third of those common colds, but they haven't been deadly. But more recently, this is the number 3 on the planet. First, we had SARS in the early 2000s, then MERS a few years ago, and now this. So there's something changing about these coronaviruses, and most likely it's because either climate change and or we're pushing further into forests that we previously didn't go into.
So that is a fascinating connection between the environmental movement and let's save our lives, right? Another reason for being concerned about that. If in fact it is rising temperatures, and if it is in fact encroaching on sort of preserved environments. Let's talk about what kills it. So in terms of UV and heat, and I saw a video going around suggesting that one should spend more time in saunas, or even use a blow dryer to blow hot air up your nose to try and get the viruses in the back of your sinus killed.
I haven't heard that one.
Yeah.
Well, I think that theoretically, what I suspect is that once the virus has entered a few of your cells, then it's pretty much going to be protected from those kind of things. Now, I don't know literally how long it takes to infect a cell, but I would imagine it's not very long. Things in biology only take a matter of seconds, if not
that long,
maybe minutes. So I think that trying to get rid of it once it's in your throat is not likely to work, or in your nose. But what you can do is try to prevent it from getting there in the first place. So the reason I drink warm tea and hot water, I've always done that anyway, because I find it's easier to do intermittent fasting that way, and I'm skipping breakfast and try to skip lunch, even though it's hot.
You also live in Boston. It gets frigid this time of year.
True. But I feel safer drinking something warm, knowing that there's no way that this virus is going to have lived in there. And that was particularly true when I was still running around and flying. I tried to drink hot things. So if you're on the front lines, if you're a nurse or a doctor, I think that it certainly wouldn't hurt to microwave your drinks and your food before eating it.
Yeah. People are asking, should I go vegan? I would answer, I've gone vegan full out, 99.99%. I'm sure there's some that's animal in nature on occasion. And I do that for my own health, independent of this. I don't think it's going to change your outcome of surviving a coronavirus infection, but I do think it's healthier for the planet and healthier for us as humans. Thoughts?
Yeah, it seems like we've got the vegans versus the carnivores war going on. I fall somewhere not in the middle. I tend to try and be as vegetarian as I can, because there's no question that people who are vegetarian on average live longer. But if your goal is to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger or The Rock, by all means you can eat a lot of protein. But I think in the long run, in terms of survival and building a stronger built body, we call this somatic maintenance. You don't want to be eating a ton of meat, but I understand why some people want to do that. It does allow you to build more muscle, and you can lose a lot of weight if you're pure protein. But I think long-term, it's probably not the right thing.
So one of the things that's interesting is the reason that we see people who are below the age of 30 having no mortality rates, and the majority of mortality rates in the 70s and 80s. I believe, and you can add your thoughts here, is that it's about the health and vitality of our immune system. These viruses, our bodies are constantly under viral attack, and our immune system beats it back, our natural killer cells, our T cells. But as you grow older, your immune system weakens, and you have much higher viral loads in your body. You have increased cancer loads in your body, and your immune system gets depleted to a large degree. And so one of the questions is, how do you augment your immune system? How do you support immunity health? Mm-hmm. Your thoughts on that?
Well, so the main thing that's going on is aging, right? This is the point that I make in my book, that we talk about diseases like diabetes and heart disease, but what's really driving those is the biological clock, which we can now measure very accurately. It's called a DNA methylation, or a Horvath clock. Now, what I think is going on probably in patients is, their biological age has gone up. Certainly in their immune cells. Their immune cells are more clonal, meaning they're all more similar to each other, which is not good. The other thing that happens, which is not often talked about, is that the glucose, or the sugars that are added to proteins, called glycosylation, these are changing as we get older. And it's thought by experts in that field that those changes during aging are part of the reason why the immune system declines. So how do you prevent that? Well, really, it starts with good health, starts with exercise, starts with being, I think fasting will help that. We've only got, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe a few months of this, so you can't go back in time. But I think it certainly wouldn't hurt for everybody to be as healthy as possible. I am exercising 3 times as much as I was last week in order to get in tip-top shape. I'm trying to eat well. It's difficult for all of us because we're in our house, and first of all, we're a little stressed and it's easy to go snack. Plus the food is not always fresh. So I understand the challenges, but now is the time to be as healthy as you possibly can, and that would boost the immune system. The other things that I do just quickly are, keeping up my levels of vitamin D, eating fresh food if I can. Those are the main things. But Peter, maybe you have some tips on keeping your immune system up.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm 100%. It's the basics, right? It's now more than ever, try and get 8 hours of sleep. Sleep is a fundamentally critical thing, and it may be difficult if you have your kids at home and not going to school, all of those things. So sleep is that. Exercise 100%. I use an app that it's free. It's from Johnson & Johnson. It's called the 7-Minute Workout. And it's something you can do for 7 minutes every day and just get some good anaerobic exercise going. I do believe mindset is fundamentally critical. If you are stressed out of your mind watching the Crisis News Network every minute of the day, that is not going to help that's CNN for those of you who didn't do the quick acronym, or whatever news channel. It's not going to help your mindset. So take a break from sort of the negative news channels out there. You can filter and use. I actually, David, you may not know this, I created a machine learning platform called Future Loop. I've been working on for the last 2 years that it does globally looks at millions of science journals, news media, all kinds of things, and then it uses semantic algorithms and then converging exponentials. And we created a version of it just for this to deliver what's going on in AI and data science, what's going on for coronavirus in CRISPR and gene therapy, what's going on in every different field. And so I read that, and it gives me a really positive-minded, like, this is all the way we're working on. Anybody who wants to go to that, by the way, it's just futureloop.com/C19, C19, and it's free, and it'll just give you an update every day on all the amazing science and work and breakthroughs focused on solving it. And then diet, I agree with you. I'm doing my turmeric drinks. I'm taking my zinc supplements. I'm definitely doing all those things.
Yeah. Zinc is possibly helpful. The science behind that looks real, and it looks like if you take zinc, you do become, you're more likely to get through a cold and other viral infections more quickly. So I certainly don't think it's going to hurt unless you've got some particular sensitivity to zinc. So I'm keeping my zinc levels up, taking, I think it's 20 milligrams a day, something like that.
That link I just saw again is futureloop.com/C19. There was a question that came up from a pregnant mom who's going to be delivering soon about whether she should be breastfeeding or using formula. The baby getting the breast milk, getting the colostrum, getting the early antibodies from you is valuable for the baby always.
For sure.
Thoughts?
Yeah. Again, I'm not claiming to be an MD. I'm trained in biology, PhD. But just I think from my own reading that it wouldn't make sense to not breastfeed. I think if you had the virus, that's very different. If you start to show signs, then, of course, that changes everything. But if you're otherwise healthy and isolated, I don't see why not. It could be only beneficial.
Yeah, the other thing I'm just reading the stream here is vitamin D. I do supplement myself pretty heavily on vitamin D and vitamin C. One thing that I'm actually going to be doing another Instagram Live on Tuesday at 3 Eastern, 12 noon with Dr. Bob Hariri, who you know, David, who's the CEO of Singularity. So one of the things that's interesting is, by the way, that woman who's pregnant, one of the things that you should do is save your child's placenta. one of the things that I think is people have saved cord blood, but now there's ability to actually bank your child's placental cells, which is sort of the boot disk for the cell for the child. And out of the placenta are natural killer cells, T cells, and stem cells. And so what Singularity has found is augmenting immunity using natural killer cells, a transfusion of natural killer cells that have come from placentas, have been super highly effective in fighting cancers, and are also in all their lab tests. They just filed an IND, an investigational new drug application, for treating those people who've got coronavirus infections with serious respiratory follow-up. What other therapies? We've just heard the chloroquine and the zithromycin results out of France. That looks exciting. What are your thoughts on that or other treatments?
Well, I've been synthesizing the scientific information out there. I saw a couple of studies on chloroquine early on from China that looked really promising, and I was surprised for a while that the U.S. government was not gung-ho on it. But it seems like people are coming around to the idea that the chloroquine and Z-Pak combination is helpful. We don't know why chloroquine works just yet. There's one idea that it prevents the virus from knocking iron out of red blood cells. But just looking at the small number of clinical trials around the world, I think that it's likely that it would help. The problem is that there's also a shortage of chloroquine. I think that they're ramping up supplies in the US now, but individuals, I think, are having a very hard time getting it. I'm aware that CVS is out of it in the states that I'm aware of. But yeah, I think for frontline therapy, and even I'm talking about, or at least trying to discuss with people whether it makes sense, if we have enough of it, to give it to nurses and doctors on the front lines as prophylaxis, because what's really important is that those people don't get sick, because we need them, and otherwise we're going to have a situation like Italy.
Yeah, I can't help stressing, as you just had, that the people on the front line are incredible heroes. I mean, they're putting themselves in harm's way. And even the young doctors and nurses are falling victim because of the viral load they're being exposed to constantly. And so it's like the equivalent of firemen running into a fire to save lives. That's pretty insane.
Yeah, and there's also another drug that I recently tweeted about, if you want to follow up in more detail.
Please.
So the Cytokine Storm seems to be very important, especially in the elderly.
Yeah.
But even middle-aged
IL-6. Yeah.
Yeah, IL-6, and it's just
Inhibitor,
IL-1. So what's happening, and this happened in some of the nursing home patients in Washington State, was that they looked like they were doing reasonably well and stable, but suddenly they crashed in a matter of hours, shocking everybody who was involved. And what they've now come to realize is that suddenly the body can start attacking itself with what's called the cytokine storm, which is essentially the immune system overreacting to the invader. And some of the mediators are what you mentioned, Peter, IL-6, interleukin-6, and interleukin-1. And there are drugs that are known to and developed to inhibit that signaling pathway. There's one that was developed by Hoffmann La Roche in the early 2000s. Its name, just looking it up, Actemra. And a colleague over in London tells me that he's a doctor, that they're using that pretty routinely on patients who are stable but haven't crashed yet. And they seem to have some results. So I don't know how much the US doctors are using it, but it's worth looking into.
I think we're going to see a spike in the number of students going to school for immunology and epidemiology coming out of this. I mean, the immune system is an incredible system in the body that we're just beginning to understand how to utilize to fight cancers and fight diseases and optimize it for ourselves. Yeah.
Well, I want to just say that if there's a silver lining to this, besides the world coming together to fight it, is that we were, over the last 10 years, it was frustrating for scientists and entrepreneurs like yourself, Peter, where most of the public wasn't really, on the ball. That scientists didn't get the respect from a lot of the population, particularly in the US, but globally, there was a decline in the appreciation / trust of scientists. I think that those days are at least over for now. when your life is on the line, who are you going to turn to if it's not a scientist or a drug developer?
Yeah, it's amazing. You're right. We villainized a lot of the pharmaceutical industry. Let's talk about a topic which is touchy for some people, but I think so important to talk about, which is vaccinations.
Oh yeah. Well, I
I
almost
mean,
went on a tirade on social
I
media this morning.
I have gone on a tirade on social media on this because I think I think vaccinating yourself and your family, especially about influenza, and there will be coronavirus vaccines. Uh, Similarly, is one of the socially most important, responsible things to do.
Yeah, it is. Of course, just for those of you who aren't up to speed on this, the doctor that claimed the vaccinations cause autism has been discredited and his papers have been withdrawn. So let's not talk about autism. What we need to talk about is that vaccines save millions of lives. Probably a quarter, if not a half of us, would not be here on Earth if it wasn't for the discovery of vaccines. They're that
Agreed.
important. And in the case of coronavirus, most of us, unless you've had SARS or MERS, have never seen one of these types of coronaviruses. Actually, SARS-1 is the closest relative. So we're at huge risk, and you can see what's happening to the elderly. I saw Ben Greenfield retweet one of these clickbaits that said that vaccines, if you have too many of them, can reduce the effectiveness of future vaccines. So I'm always suspicious when either it's clickbait or there's no scientific references. So I spent about a few hours this morning looking to see if that was true. So here's what I found. That vaccines always work. They are able to protect. Well, what I mean by always work is that even if there is multiple doses and you have a slightly reduced effect, then they still work, almost certainly. What that clickbait was referring to was a study that showed that if you repeatedly get the same vaccine, right, and most people are not getting 2 or 3 vaccines in a row from the same virus, for the same virus, right? But if you do that, eventually you have a slightly reduced impact on the immune system. But that didn't translate into a reduction in protection, which is important. And what this raises, and then I looked up other papers that said that this is not something to worry about. And in fact, because none of us have had a coronavirus vaccine before, we should all get it. But it raises an important point, which is that there's a lot of BS floating out there, particularly in social media. So you have to be careful that who you're getting your information from. And if it's just a clickbait of some kook that no one's heard of, you've got to be pretty skeptical.
Agreed, pal. And I know this divides people, but please, you're hearing from the science world, people who are out there in the medical world giving their lives right now. If you have a negative reaction to vaccines, please go and read the works of the top scientists, the top physicians, the Nobel laureates and such. Look at where your information is. I say that from my heart because I think it's very important for us to turn that tide so we don't have this level of challenge again. Let's talk about the work you've done in NMN, NAD+, resveratrol. Is there value you think during a time of viral challenge and pandemic here for those NAD boosters?
Be much more cautious than usual because usually I'm talking about chronic diseases and in the future for most of us, this is something that in the next few weeks many people could catch, and we don't want to take undue risk trying things that haven't been proven. What I can say about what we work on, for instance, the SIRT1 gene that protect pretty much all life forms, including plants and fungi. The SIRT1 gene seems to be protective against viruses. There's a lot of work with HIV. Resveratrol, which we've convincingly now shown that is an active
Pause on David's feed. Oh, there you are. You're back.
I'm back.
So,
I'm
you're
back.
saying the
So,
SIRT1 gene has protective effects against viral.
yeah, and resveratrol, which can activate SIRT1 protein, seems to be antagonistic to a bunch of different viruses, including the original SARS-1. And that's in cell culture, not being tested on humans, of course. Now, there is one word of caution when it comes to resveratrol in this case, and that is that the ACE2 protein that the virus uses to gain entry into cells is elevated at least in one mouse study where the mice were given resveratrol. So there's a word of caution on that. So I'm still taking my daily resveratrol and my NMN because I believe it's boosting my body's defenses in general, and I'm not at risk of catching the virus at this point. But I think if you're on the front lines, you want to exercise an abundance of caution.
What about people who are on ACE2 inhibitors for high blood pressure? What are you hearing there?
Yeah, well, originally doctors were excited that perhaps you could use that to block the actual spike protein from docking with the ACE2 protein. Now, there are two problems with that, so you have to be careful. One is just the evolution of this virus has made it very tight at locking into the enzyme ACE2. So it's going to be very hard to stop that using a chemical. It's much tighter and broader binding than original SARS-1 and MERS. And then the second issue is that, and let's verify this, but what I hear from trusted sources is that the ACE2 inhibitor drugs that you typically take for blood pressure lowering actually increase the amount of the ACE2 protein in a feedback, and that would make things potentially worse.
Yeah, it's not an excuse. I take an ACE2 inhibitor, and I have a thread going. My medical school class from back in the late 80s has a thread going, and I've got this dynamic conversation with these MDs around the world. I got my medical degree, but have never practiced. But it's amazing what these conversations are. Everybody's focused 100% on this, and every new drug application, every new therapy is being vetted by everybody around the clock, and journals are just shifted their entire publication focus to COVID-19. A few questions that have come in here. If you recovered from coronavirus, the question is whether if that same virus can come back, or can you see a mutation that might reinfect you? And the jury's still out there. What have you heard?
Yeah. Well, I just saw a couple of questions, just quick answers.
Yeah.
I'm not cutting back on resveratrol yet, but I would if I was out in public, probably. What kind of yogurt do I mix my resveratrol in? It's called Bravo yogurt. I have no connection to the company, but that's what I use. It seems to be quite effective in promoting healthy gut. But you ask, can you be reinfected? I think it's almost, I wouldn't say impossible, it's highly unlikely. I was concerned for the first few weeks when the pandemic was declared, because that would just be, too scary to contemplate that that's possible, because it would mean it would keep coming back constantly. But the result that came out from a monkey study recently, I think it was less than a week ago, showed that reinfection doesn't occur in monkeys with COVID-19 disease. So I think it's pretty safe to say that should not be our main concern right now. Yeah.
I'm seeing questions about reposting this video. Yes, we will have our teams repost this video in a number of different places. Let's see, David, other questions that are coming in, or anything else you want a particular focus on? We've got about 13, 14 minutes left in the hour.
Do you see any questions that people really want to know the answer to?
Should we be talking to Wim Hof as anything of his work relevant here? What can immunosuppressed patients do? And talk about herd immunity as well is another one coming through.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I think ice or cold therapy, as it's called, is overall healthy. I think there's a lot of evidence that some of these sirtuins that we work on, such as sirtuin number 3, is boosted by cold, and that will ramp up metabolism and give you healthy brown fat. But I'm unaware, and I'm happy to be informed and corrected, whether ice or cold therapy will boost the immune system. It may, but I'm unaware of that. Anyone who isn't a scientist, you can go to pubmed.org and you can at least have access to the abstracts. And I know some of it's jargon, but I think you can do a pretty good job doing your own research these days if you have the time. What was the next one, Peter?
So let's talk about herd immunity. So at a point, we have to be clear about the growth of exponentials at the beginning, right? Doubling of small numbers is really easy. And we all know, any entrepreneurs here, when you start, you can double your revenues every day when the revenues are small, but reach a point at which you get what typically in every system is a sigmoidal curve. It comes up and then it comes over the top, and that S curve. So what causes that S curve? You have this exponential growth and then it falls off. It's some limiting resources. We're seeing that with in computational. We're in our 5th generation of computation. Here, as people become immune and enter the ecosystem, the world, they no longer become repeaters of the virus. So the more people who have recovered, and to be clear, the vast majority of people from this disease will recover, right? Whether it's 98.5%, 99%, 99.5%. And then I'm going to ask you, David, in a minute, what you think the actual mortality rates may turn out to be here. That's an important conversation that we should have. But the more people who are in the ecosystem who have had it and are immune, that causes herd immunity, and the exponential growth is slowed down. It's like in a nuclear reactor putting in mediator rods in there. You want to add something about herd immunity?
Well, you described it very well. One of the overarching comments I want to make are that it's extremely complicated, and anyone who thinks they can do back-of-the-envelope calculations with their Excel spreadsheet is probably kidding themselves. And I think it's important for us to base these conclusions on true professionals. And I don't count myself as one. It's also very difficult to do those calculations because we don't have all the numbers. We don't know, particularly in the US, how many people are currently infected. The number of people are estimated to be between 20 and 50 times more than the known cases. So that even if you think, there's only 200 people in New York who have it, or whatever it is now, it's thousands. It's a lot more than that. So because of the fact that there's not a lot of testing and symptoms go undiagnosed or undetected for a while. So on herd immunity, I think the most important thing to realize is that the death rate is not that bad if you have great hospitals and you have enough ventilators. It's probably somewhere between 0.7% at the very, very low end, and as high as a few percent. But it can go much higher if you run out of hospital beds and ventilators and ICUs. And that's why it's so important that we don't go above that threshold of the healthcare capacity of your town, or of your city. And with herd immunity, well, let's start with this peak. I think we've all heard this, but quickly, if you have a very quick peak and nobody changes their lifestyle, it's going to overwhelm the US medical system by tenfold. And then you have to make decisions on who lives and who dies. We don't want that, but we're approaching that. So we need to quickly start to reverse the increase. And then spreading it out, what that actually does is it prolongs the herd immunity. It'll eventually happen. We have to all become immune or die, or at least not associate with people who have experienced it. For herd immunity, it's been calculated, and it depends, of course, on how sociable we are. If there's not a lot of sociable, if we're keeping our distance for the next couple of years, it may be that only a third of people need to have had it to have herd immunity. Or as Angela Merkel in Germany, Chancellor of Germany said, 75% is needed if we just go about our daily lives again. So it's somewhere in between there. Now, I'm hoping that we can drag this damn pandemic out until we have some better treatments. First of all, that'll mean that we can treat people better and make them survive, even if they're elderly. And second of all, maybe we'll have a vaccine by then.
So agree with what you're saying. One of the big questions is actually when we talk about mortality rates, we talk about the influenza mortality rate. large populations of people having it, significant numbers of people die, but it's a 0.1, 0.2% mortality rate. And is this 10 or 20 times worse than that? I think one of the biggest problems is we don't actually know how many people go through this asymptomatic. We don't know what going back to your high school math, you got the numerator on top, the number of people who are dead. We know that. We can measure that at a very concrete endpoint. We have no idea what the denominator is, how many people actually are infected. So I had a 99.5% temperature and a little bit of a dry cough for 2 or 3 days. Did I have it? I don't know. Am I over it? Maybe. So, I think until we get large scale testing, this is what this company, United Biomedical, is doing in San Miguel County. They're going to test 8,000 people, and they will know over 2 tests 10 days apart. They'll know the actual how many people had it, period, and then we'll know the prevalence of the disease. And it may well be that when this is all said and done, the epidemiology is such that the mortality rate was just a little bit worse than influenza, and it wasn't as bad. And it's for most 99 point whatever percent, it's an asymptomatic or a mild cold. And so we'll find that out, but we're protecting ourselves in the meantime.
Well, it's a good point. We cannot take the risk. I feel the same way about climate change, that, yeah, you can deny it, you can hope for the best, but do you really want to go there? You don't. You don't want to risk having this spread. If it turns out that the fatality numbers the rate is somewhere over 3%, that would be devastating, not just to families in this country, but the entire economy of people that are dying in those numbers. So let's hope that we don't go there, and that's the case, but we don't even want to take that risk.
Agreed. A couple of numbers. So one question is, when it's all said and done, let's use the US as an example here. And this is a global conversation, people around the world, but will we end up that 70% of the US population will have been exposed to the virus? And if they're not exposed now, we have the flu season coming back again in November, December, January, but this virus isn't going away. It'll be re-exposed then. So a couple of thoughts I'd love your reaction to. One is I do believe we're going to have eventually a very large percentage of the population exposed to it. The question is when we'll see a vaccine. I know of a couple of dozen companies working on vaccines right now. It's really a question of when the FDA will approve something. They're in human trials. Moderna came out first. And then the other thing is, if the FDA doesn't approve it, might we see a vaccine approved in Israel or other parts of the world first?
Or China.
Or China, and people will fly there to get vaccinated and then bring their immunity back.
Yeah, well, so here's my prediction that could easily be wrong. But I think the Chinese will beat us to developing a vaccine. I hear they're further ahead. And that the way they've been behaving, I agree with you. We really need to thank them. They're sharing information. They're sharing knowledge that's helpful. They're sharing kits and PPE, clothing. I think if they develop a vaccine, they'll share that information immediately. They may even start shipping vaccines around the world.
I hope they do. I surely hope they do. We've got just 5 minutes left, David. If you want to sort of summarize your thoughts, and I'll do the same.
Yeah, well, so we're at this new point in human history. We've never lived through anything like this, so it's hard to know what and where we're going with this, and that's what I think makes people feel uneasy. But I want everybody to remember that we humans are extremely passionate. We've got extremely smart people on the case. We're all turning our attention to defeating this thing, and it will happen. We're going to go through some pain over the next few weeks, but I think in 2020 we'll have this in the rearview mirror, and the world will bounce back economically. We'll be back to somewhat of a normal life. And think about after 1918, where how many people died? It was 50 million or more. That was devastating, right? That was way more deaths than World War II. And along came the Roaring 20s. And so I think this is going to be the decade we'll still call the Roaring '20s.
I love that. I'm wearing my T-shirt that says, "Let's have a moment of science instead of a moment of silence." And like I said, I am so optimistic for the same exact reasons that we've never had a common enemy on the human race, and that we're seeing massive collaboration, somewhere north of 100 million physicians, scientists, technologists, everyone taking aim on this virus. And this virus could have been a lot worse. The mortality rates could be a lot worse. And so in one sense, this is a wake-up call. My heart goes out to those who are losing their lives and their jobs, and the tens of thousands of businesses going out of business for everybody. And for those of you who are suffering on that side of the equation, this is a chance to, first of all, focus on your family, spending more time with your family, focusing on your health, learning a meditation practice, exercising every day, changing your diet to eat right. Use the fear that you have to fuel you to transform how you live your lives. If you're an entrepreneur, I talked about this with my Abundance Digital community. How do you take those things that are analog and how do you digitize them so that you can, dematerialize, demonetize, and democratize your products and services? And if you've had a business you've been struggling with, maybe it's not time to let go of that and create something new that can impact the world. David, I love who you are. I love having you as a dear friend. And thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Same to you, Peter. Thanks for everything you do. Keep it up.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Be well.